Good morning. Welcome to day 30 of our study. We're in Mark's Gospel, chapter 8, verses 11 down through 21, and I want to start by asking you a riddle. Every morning, this guy gets in the elevator in the apartment where he lives, and he goes down to the parking garage, gets in his car, drives to work. At the end of the day, he comes back, gets back in the same elevator, but this time he only rides up to the 12th floor. He lives on the 20th floor, but he gets out on the 12th floor and walks the last 8 flights up to his apartment. Why? No, that's not right. No, that's not right either. I'll let you think about that a while, but keep that riddle in mind as we look at our passage today, because in today's passage, Jesus gives a riddle, and it's something that his disciples really don't understand. And I think often we don't understand his riddle either and what he's really talking about here. So let's look at the passage. And this comes right after Jesus has fed the 5,000 or the 4,000 people. Let's start in verse 11 there. The Pharisees came and began to question him. Excuse me. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. Right after he just fed 4,000 people, they asked for a sign. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given it." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. They demand proof that Jesus has the authority to do what he's doing. Because remember what the feeding of the 4,000 meant. This was manna from heaven. This was something that was only supposed to go to God's chosen people, the Jews, and Jesus is sharing it with Gentiles. Where do you get the authority to do this? Give us a sign to show us that you have this kind of authority. Even after he just performed this miracle, they want a sign. Do you suppose that Jesus at this point is just a little bit frustrated with the Pharisees? Well, look at the encounter now he has with his disciples, and here we see his riddle. Verse 14, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. The yeast of the Pharisees. What does that mean? Verse 16, they discussed this with one another and said, well, it's because we have no bread. He's obviously talking about bread, and he means we should have bought bread with us, right? No, that's not what Jesus is talking about at all. So he explains it to them, and his explanation makes it even more confusing. Verses 17 through 21, after they're aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 7. He said to them, do you still not understand? Oh, I get it. Okay. I see what you mean now, Jesus. Before we picked up 12 basketfuls, now we picked up 7 basketfuls. Well, that makes all the sense in the world. We get it now. All right, do you want me to explain the riddle to you? It's pretty obvious. He was a midget, not Jesus, the guy who pushed the elevator to go down. When he came back at the end of the day, he got out on the 12th floor because that was as high as he could reach. Oh, okay. When it's explained, it makes sense. Jesus explains his riddle, the yeast of the Pharisees, but it doesn't make much sense. So what is he talking about here? Well, it's all in the numbers, just like Jesus said. He has them focus on numbers. How many basketfuls did you pick up when I fed the Jews? When I fed the Jews, that was the feeding of the 5,000. That was the first miracle. How many basketfuls did you pick up? 12. Now, 12 is an important number in Scripture. And many, many times it comes to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. It's another way of saying the Jews. So that 12 there was very significant, and it represented this Jesus who was bringing you manna from heaven, just like Moses. is coming as the fulfillment of the promise to the Jews. That was really the underlying subtext of the feeding of the 4,000. Now, with the feeding of the 5,000 first, now with the feeding of the 4,000, largely Gentiles, as we said before, how many basketfuls are picked up? 7. Well, in that culture at that time, 7 represented the nations of the world. Another way of saying Gentiles. And remember, this was the bread of heaven that was only for God's chosen people, no one else. And so when Jesus feeds the 5,000 and they pick up 7 basketfuls afterwards, the subtext here is, guess what? God is going to give his blessing, his manna, to even the Gentiles. This means that God is going to start considering Gentiles his people. And as I asked you earlier, do you know any Gentiles? This is us. So the gospel is going to come out to people that the Jews didn't think it should come out to. So now we come back to the question of the yeast. What is the yeast? Remember Jesus' parable of the woman who puts yeast into her dough and it permeates everywhere. The idea of yeast means it's something, it's a thought. It's a way of looking at things that will permeate everywhere. The gospel will permeate everywhere. But be careful. Be careful because the thinking of the Pharisees permeates everywhere as well. And what is that thinking? That the blessings of God are only for us, only for the people that we say it's for, only for the people that we're comfortable with, who look like us, think like us, act like us, have the same kind of income that we do, come from the same background that we do, have the same skin color that we do, are the same age that we are, whatever. There's always restrictions that we put up and say the gospel is for us. And that can kill the church faster than anything else because it's against God's agenda. God's agenda is that nobody should perish, but everyone should come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And when we start saying, no, this is for us, you see, really what's behind all that is the idea of preference. This is the way I like it. These are the people I want to be around. I don't want to be around other people that I might not be comfortable with. That's the yeast of the Pharisees, and that will kill the church. Are we godly people who love Jesus? If we are, then we're on the Lord's side, and that means we care about his agenda, not ours. We don't fight for our preferences. We fight for what will bring the most people to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. I can remember years ago, there was a church not too far away from where I was pastoring, and this church was struggling. They were running about 30 people, and they had just fired their pastor, and they shouldn't have fired their pastor. He was a good guy. He was a friend of mine. But this church went through preachers pretty quickly. Had a great building, but only about 30 people. And they asked to meet with me, and they just wanted some advice on how do we look for a new pastor? What should we be looking for? What kind of a salary package should we put together? And they just wanted to pick my brain on that. So I met with them, and for about an hour, I answered their questions on what they're looking for, what kind of qualifications, so on and so forth. And then they said, well, we want to thank you for being here. And I said, whoa, I'm not leaving yet. And I think that surprised him a little. I said, I'm not going to go because I promised myself that I wouldn't leave until I told you what I think you should do. See, I've answered your questions about how to find a new pastor. Now let me tell you what I think you should do. So there's a church in town here. It's a church of about 200 people. They meet in a movie theater, and it's mostly young families. They don't have enough money to afford a church, but they're growing and they're exciting and they got a great new young pastor. What you need to do is open your church to them. You need to combine your churches together. You have a great building and no people. They have a lot of people and no building. Seems logical you should get together. And they said to me, we've actually thought about that, but we're worried that we would lose a third of our congregation. I'm so proud of what I told them next. I said, listen, I'm not good at math. That's one of the reasons I went into ministry, because there's not a lot of math. But you're running 30 people right now. And if you lose a third of your congregation, that means you would lose 10 people and gain 200. I'm pretty sure that 200 is bigger than 10. And you could see the light bulbs going on, and they went, we've never thought of that. And about a month later, those two churches merged. And to this day, they're still merged and they're doing great things for God. And I told that pastor, about a year later, because I'm talking to him one day, and I, told him a story about meeting with that church and what I told him. I said, really, let's be honest, you owe your new building to me. I'm the reason you have that. I said, but I don't need any plaque commemorating what I've done or anything like that. I want a statue. I want a statue in your foyer of me. I never did get the statue, but here's the thing. I love that story because you could see that what was holding them back was their preference. They could have done great things for God, but this was a church that was being asked to get past your preferences, get past the way you've always done things, and try something new and exciting. Try even reaching out to people that are younger than you, that don't think like you, that don't come from the same mindset. And they did. They did. And almost 20 years later, they are thriving and doing great things. Praise God for that. You guys have a great day, and we will pick it up on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend. See you then.